Don't eat things made in a plant, eat things made from plants. And that is a quote from our next guest, renowned cardiologist, Dr. Columbus Batiste. Hi, I'm Dr. Jarek Conrad. Welcome to Healthy and Black, where I share information about the state of health for Black America across 7 categories, from emotional health to physical health. I became plant-based over 15 years ago after losing so many of my family members to chronic health issues. Now I want to help you take control of your health. Welcome to this episode of Healthy and Black. Glad to have you here. Have a special guest today. I've been waiting to talk to this man for quite a while. I met him a few years ago. We were working on a documentary together. We were both in the film, but didn't meet while filming the thing. But afterwards, we kind of followed up, caught up with each other, and we just hit it right off. So I'm delighted to see you, Dr. Batiste, and I'm going to do you justice. I'm going to read the bio for you so people can understand that this is important stuff that we're talking about here. And then we're just going to chat, and catch up and see if we can talk about some things that might be helpful for our folks as we move forward.
Absolutely.
So here's the formal bio. Dr. Batiste is the Regional Chief of Cardiology for Southern California Permanente Medical Group. He is a proud graduate of Loma Linda University School of Medicine in Loma Linda, California. He's board certified in both cardiovascular disease and interventional cardiology by the American Board of Internal Medicine. He's passionate about narrowing the health disparities gap, which is something that we're both passionate about, by educating on the power of a whole foods plant-based diet, exercise, and stress reduction. These efforts have led to a collaboration with the nonprofit Healthy Heart Nation, along with the American Heart Association and the Association of Black Cardiologists, to deliver information through lectures, articles, and media. I mentioned that we were both in Eating You Alive together, but you just run a search for Dr. Batiste and you'll see various podcasts, episodes, just lots of really good information. He is also a new author. So congratulations on that. I saw the book came out.
Joined your ranks.
That's right. That's right. Well, I got a couple, but then we never.
I know. I listen. You have to start somewhere. You have to start somewhere. Starting with 1,000 miles starts with the first step, first book.
That is true. So we'll talk, more about the book as our conversation goes. But I wanted to get a little bit some personal information for people to maintain your own wellness. So to practice what you preach, you believe balance is the key. So that's one of the reasons that we hit it off. For me, my ultimate goal in life is having some balance, having options and having some balance. That's what, what I want to achieve. He spends quality time with his family. He exercises frequently, as you might imagine, and he follows his favorite 2 sports teams. Don't want to make anybody mad, but the Cowboys and the Lakers. I will resist the jokes about the Cowboys and all that. You probably have heard enough of those.
Listen.
I won't go there.
Yeah, don't go. I mean, unless you want to lecture on sport, all right?
No, I won't go there. I won't do that. But when I was reading through your bio, I was reminded that when I have guests, they're such accomplished people. They do so many things, yet they're still able to take care of themselves. They exercise, they eat well. And oftentimes when I'm trying to give people advice about making a diet or lifestyle change, they always say, I don't have time. Yet we have all these busy people like you who find a way to make the time. I think I might start asking all of my guests kind of one question before we get into everything. And that is, how do you make that time with all that you have going on? How is it you can maintain a whole foods plant-based diet, exercise, sleep well? How do you manage to achieve that balance for yourself?
Man, I mean, same way you do. All right. It takes sacrifice. I'm gonna go back to something you said. Our goal is to maintain balance. but
Yeah.
you can't get balance without sacrifice,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, because when you talk about, I want balance financially, that means that you're going to probably not be spending money everywhere you want to spend it.
That's right.
If I want balance in terms of my well-being and my health, that means I'm going to have to be committed in ways that otherwise that requires thought and
Yeah.
planning, and the devil's in the details with it. So, I mean, I try to live by the mantra, which is you go slow to go far, right? And
Yeah.
so sometimes I have to slow down. I have to take time for myself. I need to go in and get my exercise on. I need to go and make sure I get my rest, whatever it may be, to kind of rejuvenate myself and recharge myself. Because Jarek, when you think about it, and this is relevant, everyone can kind of tap into this. What happens when you charge your phone, but you keep using it while you're charging it? It doesn't charge up fast.
That's right. That's right. You
It doesn't
damage
charge
the
up
battery
fast.
over time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to leave it alone, walk away, let it recharge, and then come back and get its full use. And we need to treat our bodies the same way. We really
I think
do.
that's so important, man. I am going to ask that question for everybody, and we're going to hear some common themes. But it's probably good for the people who are watching this and the people who are listening to this to understand that this stuff is possible. The other thing that came through for me in your answer was emotional intelligence and impulse control.
Yeah.
You're talking about the long game and not the short game. Short
Mhm.
game is great and it feels good until you have to pay the price down the road.
That's right.
And then from a health perspective, you end up seeing people like you. We're trying to avoid people. We love you, but we're trying to avoid people from having to come to you.
For sure. For sure. The other way I kind of break it down to people is that, when you start working, and all of us have worked to some degree, and whether or not you're putting money inside of a 401k or whatever that mutual fund is, or maybe even your social security, it's just being taken out. That money is being taken out. We all can use that money right now. I have kids in college. I can use that money right now. Trust me. But what am I doing? That money is investing in my future self.
Yeah.
Why? So I can live the life I want to live in that future. So the same thing goes for our health. We're investing in our future selves by every little bit that may perceive as a sacrifice, but it's not. It's really an investment. And you're trying to get the maximum return on investment.
Yeah. Now, so at some point, I'll get to some of the questions that I put together that maybe we would talk about, but you just opened something up for me that is a good exercise for people. So if you're watching this and you're listening to this, take a moment. It's the beginning of the year. People are thinking about, what kind of year it's going to be, resolutions and all that stuff. Think about your future self. And
That's
don't
right.
go 5, 10 years down the road. Just think about at the end of this year or the beginning of this time next year, what does your future self look like? What has happened in your life for, the good? What positive changes have you made? Just envision your future self and write it down, because writing it down makes it more active and you're more likely to actually do something, and share it with someone. Because when you share it with someone, that further increases the probability that you actually get it done. But just spend some time visualizing, not an hour or 2 hours. Just spend, just a few minutes visualizing what that future self is like. And then you have to backtrack. Okay, what am I gonna have to start doing today to make sure I can achieve that? And that's a good activity.
It
Thank you.
is.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
No,
Do you
I
ever do that
love
with
it.
your patients?
I'm gonna tell you, I do. I talk about it, and we'll talk about this in the book, whatever else.
Yeah.
But it's a great author, Willpower Instinct, Kelly McGonigal. For years, I was
Mhm.
quoting that book, right?
Mhm.
And some of the things that stuck out to me is the fact that it's the concept of, what do you want? What do
Mhm.
you want? What are you willing to do to get what you want? And what
Yeah.
won't you do to get what you want? Like, those are important things to
Yeah,
see.
man.
What do
Yeah.
I want? Like, what am I willing to do? And what am I
Yeah.
not willing to do to get what I want? And that those things feed into each other. And a parallel to that is, in the words of E.T., Eric Thomas, the hip hop preacher. I'm not even going to try and say
Yes.
it, take it and steal it. He said you have to put pen to paper, right?
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
put pen to paper. And what I say in the book is, you have to then make a plan and kill the plan.
Yeah.
Derek, you
Yeah.
got to kill that plan. Now,
Yeah.
when I say kill the plan, you want to, once you visualize what it is that you want, you have to now go ahead and solve for all the problems, those landmines that are going to be there, all the reasons, the excuses that you're going to make and then solve for them.
That's right. Right. That's right.
Solve for 'em.
Because if it were easy, you would have done it already.
That's right. That's right.
So you're going to face some resistance, and resistance might come from places where you least expect it to. But again, it goes back to emotional intelligence. I mean, it's hard for me to talk about behavior change at all without referring back to EI, because it requires some self-awareness, it requires some optimism, it requires some impulse control, just that whole collection of skills and competencies that you have to tap into along the way. So let's talk a little bit now about the heart, right? This is your expertise. So cardiology, I talk a lot about doing everything that we can to reverse or prevent chronic health issues. And we know, heart disease is still a leading killer in our country, right?
Absolutely.
Despite all the technological advances we have, we're still struggling with the same chronic health issues. What would you describe as the state of cardiovascular disease in America today? Where are we? How would you describe, what our status is as it relates to that?
Yeah. We're technologically advanced, but we're really illiterate as it relates to the burden and the risk of cardiovascular disease. And I say that, it's not me saying it, it's what the science says. That nearly 50% of individuals out there, somewhere between 50 and 60%, actually have no idea that heart disease is the number one killer. Still, in 2020, as a 4, now 5, had no idea that heart disease is the number one killer. The symptoms that present. But here's the thing, like I was in the cath lab yesterday, which is where we do procedures to evaluate patients, their arteries and so forth. And I was talking to a man whose cholesterol is through the roof. He's obese, he's pre-diabetic, and he's only 48, has obstructive sleep apnea, tells me about his work-life balance and so forth, and his nutrition intake. And he said, but doc, I'm worried about my heart. I said, man, I said, what you're saying you're worried about your heart is almost like saying, I'm worried about someone stealing my car, but I leave my windows down. I leave my car, I leave my keys in the ignition, and I have my wallet sitting there, but I'm worried about it. He's like, all right, doc. I said, you're not doing anything to protect yourself.
Yeah.
You're not taking any of the basic fundamental steps to change the narrative. And so I see the state of cardiovascular disease, unfortunately, as technology has risen, we feel as if the quick fix is there. So stents, and the idea now that we can do stents and do the procedure through your arm and you're up and moving back and forth like it's an IV, you feel as if, well, man, that's no problem. I just go in for a tune-up. But not recognizing the layered impact it has on you, that it's slowly, just like guerrilla warfare, just eroding your longevity, but worse than your longevity, your health span, how long you can live healthfully is a problem.
Your quality of life.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so as bad as it is for America and Americans, it's even worse for African Americans. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think first it's important to note that there is not a genetic predisposition towards why it's worse in African Americans. And we understand that the designation of race is a social construct. And we see that the disparities, which just essentially means differences in outcomes, it pretends itself to social outcomes, to societal effects that are there. That's really the crux of the matter. And so we recognize that on the high level, it's access to care, insurance status. We understand that we all have biases. As a physician, as providers, as people, as human beings, we're taught to assess our environment, and we take in what we believe are risks that we will make adjustments accordingly. And so this just becomes innate. We don't even know that we're doing it. That's just part of what happens. And so the same thing happens in medicine, fortunately and unfortunately. And so in that process, sometimes there is the perception that a particular segments of the population will or will not follow through with therapy. They may or may not be truly stating the real problem. And so they're ignored, and they're less inclined to receive vitally important, not only procedures, medications, and even references for lifestyle. So we know that women and people of African descent are less likely to be even referred for cardiac rehabilitation. A vitally important lifestyle metric that's implemented. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And here's why it's important to everyone. because the burden of cardiovascular disease, it happens younger and younger. It impairs in the person's ability to work. It
Yeah.
impacts their financially, their financial money earning period of time, which means that they make them a ward of the state, which then increases taxes, which then increases health expenditures. And it's a vicious cycle that takes place, not just in African Americans, not just in females, but it's also geographically regional. That there are
Yeah.
segments of the Caucasian population that are disproportionately burdened by cardiovascular disease based on where they live.
Yeah.
And that's something that has to change.
Yeah. So there's a whole host of factors. So you mentioned all these societal issues. Some of it, gets back to, institutional factors, institutional racism, individual racism, in the case of
Mhm.
some of the biases that, happen inside the doctor's office. Uh, it's fascinating. What I try to spend time on is working on trying to deal with these systemic issues. But as I'm talking to people who are listening to this, like while we're working on those things, you got to control what you can control.
That's
So
right.
you can't fix all the biases that people have, all the structural, institutional racism at an individual level race. You can't fix all this stuff, but you can start to control your own lifestyle. And
That's
that's the
right.
part that I love when you mention that, we don't, there's nothing that says that Black people have to have this stuff. And I hear too many people, oh man, it runs in my family. So, I didn't have a choice.
Cookbooks run in the family.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Right. Or people say, man, my numbers are great, but your numbers are good because you're taking all those medications. You didn't mention that you're taking the medication. Your numbers are artificially great. So let's talk a little bit more about what people can do. And obviously, you and we're going to talk about a whole foods plant-based diet and why that's so vitally important, along with exercise and proper sleep and all that. But specifically as it relates to heart health, what do we know about a whole foods plant-based diet and our hearts?
Yeah. So I'm gonna take a step back and I'm gonna say first, I want people to do three things. Number one is you're going to empower yourself, right? You have to educate yourself. So educating yourself based on what the numbers mean. So you said something that was key that you'll ask people and they'll say, oh, my numbers are good. And I always fire back, what does that mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Well, the
yeah.
doc told me my numbers are, well, no. Tell me what that means. What
Specifically,
exactly
what
is
is
good, right?
yeah,
And what's
yeah,
not. And so empowering yourself, number one, with that knowledge. What tests should you be having? Yeah, in the words of my wife from business, you have to inspect what you expect. So
yeah,
if I'm expecting health, I have to inspect that by having tests to
yeah,
make sure as a barometer, just like you check your bank account, just
yeah,
like you're checking certain things to see what the functionality is. And then you have to empower folks to enact change. And that change is now we talk about what do you have? What tools do you have? What choices do you have? And so as we get into a whole food plant-based diet, let me ask you a question, Jared, right? I know this is your
yeah,
interview. This
yeah,
is
yeah,
your
yeah, yeah,
show.
no, this is good, this
You're
is
trying
good.
to take over your show, right?
This is good.
30 years ago, do you think was there as many plant-based items in grocery stores, at restaurants? Let's say like your different milk choices. Let's say your
Oh,
different like meat substitutes, all these different things like
we
that.
we definitely didn't have all those.
We didn't have, and so the
Yeah,
question is, right, and we're gonna get back to really what you mean, what you're saying, right, is
yeah,
why is there a difference now? Why is there
yeah,
a difference now?
yeah,
Because the business of business is business.
yeah,
Because our business institutions, our food and drug institutions, they found that there is a market for it because people demanded it.
yeah.
And so there is power to change even the big industries based upon grassroots action. And that's where empowerment comes in.
Well, what's critical about that is your point, business is business. So this is not just some, oh, I want people to be healthier, so I'm gonna offer them healthier products. It's number one, they're demanding it. Number two, you're gonna get left behind as a business if you're still producing this stuff that is wrecking people's health. The more educated they get about what's wrecking their health, the better choices some people are gonna make. So I don't think it's a coincidence that some of the biggest investors in some of the
Mhm.
meat alternatives and, the plant plant-based products are companies that produce stuff that is, animal products,
That's
because
right.
they're thinking about their future. They're thinking
That's right.
about that long term that we talked about. So that's a critically important point. I'll go back to the grocery store comment, and I'll tell you why I said what I said. Uh, it, th- we talk a lot about food deserts, and certainly there's some truth to that. We know that, you know, quality, healthy food has been a challenge for people in certain pockets of our country, particularly in poor neighborhoods, a lot of our neighborhoods. But what I tell people is the reality, though, is when we did get to the grocery store, we weren't buying the asparagus. They had it. We just wasn't buying it. We were getting other things. So it's a combination. There's some
Absolutely.
truth to the food desert, but again, if we are buying the quality products, if we're buying the plant-based products, the stores will carry them.
That's
If we
right.
demand that we have these options, we live in food deserts, we got to have more options. And then they start putting these options there, and we don't buy that stuff. Those options are going to disappear from a business standpoint. So this is you got to do something here. Nobody's going to force it down your throat. You still have to be intentional.
Yeah. No. And listen, for those of African descent out there who are listening, we understand that there's a history, right? There's a history behind this. We go back in history, our current quote unquote culture is not what it was back in West Africa, right? In
Right.
terms of a plant predominant diet, right?
Right.
We understand that what started happening during enslavement, that you're given the afterthoughts, the things that nobody wanted, the discard,
Scraps.
that you had to make something out of nothing. And so we acknowledge that and we call it soul food, and we celebrate the fact of making lemonade out of lemons, but we forget the resiliency that the enslaved had by going and growing fruits and vegetables that they then, in some instances, could sell, but to supplement their diet with
Yeah.
mustard greens and collards and various aspects there. Why can't we accentuate, why can't we acknowledge the resiliency and what happened in toiling the earth to do it? And we look at
Yeah.
the progression. Then the second phase, great migration, living inside these shanty areas that are there with limited cook spaces. Some of
Yeah.
the first adopters of fast food, of eating foods from other ethnic and cultural groups. And
Yeah.
then that transformed into, once again, the business saying, oh, we want to go ahead and put these fast food restaurants in these communities. We want to
That's
bisect and
right.
dissect the communities with highways that limit and create noise that impacts your cardiovascular outcome, that creates smog and pollution that increases your cardiovascular outcomes, that we have all these factors, the noise that decreases your sleep, that all these factors begin to happen through redlining. And so we understand that now foods are they begin being subsidized. That now I may choose and decide I want a head of lettuce, but it's cheaper for me to go to the fast food joint and get 5 burgers for $1.50, right?
Yeah.
And French fries. That now I say, and on top of it, from a psychological perspective, they have a jump gym there, a play
Yeah.
zone for my kids,
Yeah.
and
The kids can
they give
go.
them toys.
And they're marketing to the kids.
They're marketing.
Yeah.
And so I don't want us to negate an understanding of a perspective of the impact that many communities, not just African American communities, have faced over the years in terms of the environments that they live in. And they might even feel enslaved,
That's right.
captivated inside these zones.
That's
But
right.
the thing is that you have to stop and look above and have a vision and recognize that, guess what? I need to make convenience work for me. I may have to go in and buy some frozen vegetables at the 99-cent store. I might have to go in and create my own bowl and have my rice, because the more work, the less work I have to do, the more costly it is. If I go from rice I have to cook to boil in a bag or frozen rice, it's going to be more expensive. If I go from
Yeah.
dry beans to beans that are inside of a can or that are served at a restaurant, it's going to be more expensive.
Yeah.
So the less convenient, the more cost effective it is for you,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
And so
Don't let culture, cost, and convenience ruin your health.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it.
It's really important. I know the show is healthy and black, but I do have a lot of white listeners that say,
Mhm.
"Hey, man, I'm interested in this stuff," and so it's really important to hear a little bit of that history. My book, I try to I try to encourage businesses to be more open to learning about things like redlining. I specifically mentioned redlining in the book because we're still dealing with the impact of that. I mean, we're still very scattered out. We don't, we're still segregated in many ways in our communities. Even though the top line might say a city like Chicago, for instance, we mentioned Chicago before the call.
Yeah.
A city like Chicago is very diverse. Once you get beyond that top line and you go into where do people live, they live in these segregated pockets. So we're still living with the implications or the impact of redlining and other issues.
But even digging in from a health outcome perspective, there have been multiple studies ad nauseum that when you overlie the redlining maps, and for those of you who don't know, red lines means that they were segments of the population that were felt to be essentially undeserving to live inside of well manicured areas that
Look,
have green space and have
no matter their
markets.
credit score, no
It
matter
didn't
their
matter
ability to
what you did,
pay.
not at all. And so when you overlay it, you see what? You see higher pollution, you see higher rates of diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure. You still see the proverbial increased distance to go grocery shopping. That's the food deserts. You
Yeah,
see the increased fast food ratio, which is the
yeah,
food swamps. And you see all of this that still persists into this day and time. So there is a lot of reverberations from this historical. And I mention a lot to folks is I'll tell them, as a physician, the first thing I do is that I will find out what is your history of present illness. What's going on with you right now? I want to know about the here and now. But I
yeah,
don't stop there. I have to
yeah,
find out what? Your past medical history. I have
yeah,
to find out your past surgical, your
yeah,
family history, your
yeah,
social history. Why do I care about the history? Because it can play a significant role in what's going on right now. And that's the reason why this historical data is so important, the historical context of what has transpired, so we are not doomed to repeat it. And so we can apply the appropriate therapeutic intervention. And so, the last thing I'll say about it is that as an interventional cardiologist, my job is to take care of the sickest of the sickest. So
yeah,
God forbid, Jarek, if you came in and you're like, oh, my doc sent me over, just wanted to get my heart checked out, but I feel good, doc. And someone else comes in and they're having crushing chest pain. They're having features of a heart attack. I'm not going to say, well, you know what? You were here first. Let me just take care of
yeah,
you. I have to take
yeah,
care of the one who's sick and who's dying and looks like they're in greatest despair. And
yeah,
that's why addressing communities at risk, however you want to phrase it, African American community, our indigenous population, whatever it may be, right? Our Appalachian white community, addressing communities at risk is so imperative for everyone across the board.
yeah, yeah. We're all going to pay that cost at
That's
some
right.
point. To one of the earlier points you made in discussion. This stuff is fascinating, man. It's really important as we talk about all these different elements of health. I try to bring in some of that historical perspective because I think people look at things differently if they understand how it got to this point. These
Yes.
are not just willful decisions, out of context that people are making. The context, matters. So this is critical. Like we'll be talking for 2 hours if I don't
Yeah.
move on
Right.
to a couple things. I do want to make sure we talk about the book before we go. So I didn't know you were selfish, but the title of the book is Selfish, A Cardiologist's Guide to Healing a Broken Heart, and it was
Yes.
published this past June. So
Yes.
let's talk a little bit about what's the main thing that you want people to take away from reading that book.
Yeah. Is that, I want to encourage you. Obviously, if you haven't caught on, selfish is a pillar. It stands for it's an acronym. It's a pillar of health, mnemonic. And so when we look at being selfish, we get selfish so we can live a life of purpose. In order to get selfish, I believe selfish is the cure to disparities. It's the cure to injustices. I believe getting selfish is the answer. And so the first S begins with spiritual. And whether or not you're religious or not, it really speaks to the Latin root of spirit is breath. And we
Mhm,
understand the power of breathing. What happens when
mhm.
we're stressed? We hold our breath. We don't really breathe, right? So
Yeah,
that breathing, that exhalation, it activates what's called the parasympathetic tone that helps
yeah,
tend and befriend and relax the body. We understand the deleterious effects of stress. that happens, whether it's discriminatory stress, life stressors, relationship, financial, all these things play such a substantial role in cardiovascular outcomes. But when we look at more spiritual side, we understand the power of meditation and prayer for increasing the prefrontal cortex, the thickness. This is where we reason and where we think and where our planning takes place. It allows that focus. But here's the thing, it also tones down the amygdala, which is a small area that houses all of the rumination, all that inner child, all the fears. And it helps tone that down and gives us focus that may be able to allow us to empathize with others, see what others are going through.
My guest would know of the amygdala from all our discussions on emotional intelligence. So.
I see. I love it. So that's the first S. The E is for exercise, but not exercise just solely in the way in which you think, but exercising belief. People without hope are doomed. We have to believe. And the power of belief is so important. And I always give the analogy, right? And I didn't originate this, but what do we test every single medication against?
Placebo.
Placebo. And what is placebo? A placebo is an inorganic, inactive substance that has no biological activity, right?
Yeah.
So in reality,
but it works.
But here's the thing. So in reality, we're testing a medication against your mind.
That's right.
The power of belief that this pill works. So any medication that we give you has to outwork your brain.
Yeah.
There's so much science that tells us not only your provider instills a level of belief and confidence that your circumstances do, that the power of the mind is so imperative in terms of your outlook and having a positive outlook. And that's where we have to begin the process of exercising that belief and then obviously moving our body. All right. And
just put a pin in that though, Dr. Batiste. I know we don't have a lot of time, but it's really important for people to get that last point. So when we think about we think it's intangible, it's abstract, believe in this. What you're saying is, no, this is scientific. You start to release certain chemicals. You start things to physically happen in your brain and your body associated with belief. It's not about just touchy-feely stuff. This is science.
There is science. And so there's studies that have been done. Aaliyah Crum out of Stanford did studies of just having people have their belief that a milkshake was higher calorie begin to gain weight. Of maids inside of a hotel, a group was told that this is as effective as exercise for you for losing weight, lost weight. So the power of belief of telling someone that this substance was going to lead to a rash, and what begins to happen in the body.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
So the mind is a power. Now, I'm not saying the mind is, I'm not talking about voodoo and that this all of a sudden you're going to be able to like genie and snap.
Right.
But I'm telling you that because we live in a society, myself included, in which what we don't know, we vilify. We say that it's witchcraft. We say that there's something because we haven't poured in, there's not money invested in it.
Yeah.
We say there's not scientific rigor inside of it. Doesn't mean there's not validity to it, that there's not power that's there. That the actual truth that when we do studies and we looked years ago at individuals who went through exercise training versus placement of stents, coronary stents, where we open up the arteries and dilate the vessels and leave a wire mesh there, that they did better if you did the exercising than placement of stents at a lower cost and more beneficial to you. There's power in and you don't have to be a marathon runner. I don't have to be whoever your favorite athlete is on the Dallas Cowboys, the greatest team inside of football lore, right?
No, I'll leave it alone. I'll pass.
Right. So, I mean, I can just get something we call NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, just standing, fidgeting, moving around, that's power.
Which, if you're eating a plant-based diet, a whole food plant-based diet, you're standing and you're burning calories.
That's right.
You start to affect that metabolism. So that's terrific. So we went through
S and
S, the E.
Now L, love. Anyone who's loved anything or anybody understands that love is not a noun. Love is a verb. And verb means that you have forgiveness. Just ask my wife, who forgives me all the time. You have gratitude, expressions of gratitude. You have volunteering. And so beyond the studies observational that tell us that individuals who volunteer more live longer, have lower burden of high blood pressure and decreased risk of death, that individuals who with gratitude decreases stress, lower stress hormones,
Yeah.
improve blood pressure, inflammatory markers. But here's the one that's most phenomenal to me: forgiveness. The power of forgiveness, not just yourself, but of others. That they did a study looking at two groups of individuals who had known blockages and lack of blood flow to the heart muscle. And what they found, I talk about this in my book, the individuals who went through forgiveness training and then did anger recall had improved blood flow to areas that were previously devoid of blood flow.
Wow.
Because it tells us that anger and stress leads to spasming, dysfunction of the arteries that can restrict blood flow. But when you let go of the anger, when you forgive, when you say, you know what, I'm not going to give you free rent in this big old head of mine, you got to have to pay for it or get out. All of a sudden, the vessels open up. The heart's less strained and you have less risk of future events. There's power inside these things.
Let me make one quick point, and I know you got a hard stop in a little bit, but I want to make a real quick point, because I've often said that racism, sexism, any kind of ism is bad for your health.
Absolutely.
And this is what you've just pointed out to. So this is what you just pointed out. So focusing on health and wellness not only benefits people who are suffering from these tremendous disparities, people who've been victims of bias and discrimination and all that, but it also helps people who perpetrated that stuff.
That's right.
In the examples you just mentioned. That's fascinating.
Absolutely. It is. And beyond a shadow of a doubt, discrimination is a stressor. There is no doubt. And that's why I say that our health equals resiliency divided by stress. The higher our stress, the poorer our health. Everything we do is either aiding or adding to our resiliency or adding to our stress. That leads us to food. So I'll tell you, plant-rich food, fiber-rich food, foods made from the earth, food that can survive a nuclear holocaust. It's free of the additives and preservatives, and it's not made in the plant, it's made of plants. These foods have been shown to lower your inflammation. They decrease markers of cardiovascular disease, lower the blood pressure. Studies actually show that the DASH diet, which is built upon the back of a whole food plant-based diet, was shown, to be honest with you, to be more impactful in African Americans than other groups, to lower the blood pressure by nearly 13 millimeters of mercury, more as powerful as any medical pharmaceutical intervention. There's power by adopting this.
We need it more than anybody.
We need it
I'm
more than
hoping that the listeners are listening. We can benefit more than anybody. I'm hoping the listeners are thinking
eat
about
those
that.
collards, eat the kales, and throw out the turkey neck bone and ham hocks out that stuff, because I'll tell you, those green leafies give you dietary nitrates. These things called dietary nitrates are like the precursors. These are like the pills we give you called nitroglycerin. Helps dilate the vessel and restore the health of the arterial wall. There's power that's there.
It's medicine.
It is medicine. I'll tell you, the fiber, what the fiber does, the fiber will help to excrete what's called bile acids, making the body have to absorb more cholesterol out the system to make more bile acids. It becomes this vicious cycle that begins to happen to your health from head to toe. So the I stands for intimacy of relationships, taking time and understanding that birds of a feather flock together, like my parents told me back in the day, right? You're going to go as far as the rest of the flock that you're going with, that can support you, that we can't, no man's an island. We have to move together, right? And the old saying, the African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together, right? There's power that's there. The second S is sleep, rest, the power, like we talked about at the beginning. You have to recharge, take a nap, take time away. That's so important. Do it, take small bites. And the last one is H, joy, humor, or joy of life, laughter. So I'll tell you one thing that I've adopted, then I'll tell you one scientific study to support this, is that when I'm stressed at work and I'm rounding a lot of sick patients, I will watch a comedy show while I'm reading studies. And I'm literally laughing out loud to alleviate the stress. And I'll tell you, there was a study, there were two groups of individuals who suffered with cardiac events, heart attacks, bypass surgery, and they were sent in cardiac rehab, which is a program that implements nutrition, medication adherence, stress reduction, exercise, all these tools that are there. And so what they did, it's shown to be extremely valuable. One group, they said, I want you to watch 30 minutes of whatever makes you laugh. It could be Dave Chappelle. It could be Friends, comedy, whatever it is.
It could be the Cowboys. I mean, it could be anything.
We're gonna ignore that, right? See that hateration?
I resisted for as long as I could.
That's what you don't want to do. When I talk about love and empathy, right? That's not what you want to do, right? You want to appreciate, you want to give respect to the America's team. Come on now, America's team. But when they had these two groups, it's no surprise. The group that they had watched the comedy shows or whatever it is had lower rates of chest pain, less readmissions to the hospital, less need for repeated procedures. There's power. It decreases your stress. It relaxes the lining of your vessels. And there's so much power in taking moments to break and get that levity and that humor. And by doing this, you find purpose in life. And that's why the second greatest basketball player to ever lace him up in Michael Jordan. I said it. Said it. Right?
You got Kobe?
LeBron. Come on.
Oh, you got LeBron. Right.
LeBron just passed my man Magic. Magic was number one, but but that's all right. That's a whole nother conversation.
Another debate. Down the road, I think more people will be saying LeBron after he retires.
I think
it's gonna
so
be more.
I think so too.
You talked about my last episode. We talked about one of the last episodes. We talked about the mind-body connection, and you just eloquently laid out that mind-body connection and the scientific basis for it. And just think about the other side of everything you said. When you harbor hate, when you're very stressed out, when you think about all the damage that you're causing, you oftentimes you think you're hurting somebody else, but you're hurting yourself, and it becomes this vicious cycle. That is just fascinating to me, for people to sit down. I wish that we had a mechanism for people to see it, and maybe somebody will create some kind of technology that I can watch my mood, and I know what my mood is, and I can see how my mood affects things that are going on in my body. It's fascinating. So, look, I know you got to get ready to go. This has been a wonderful conversation. We might have to follow up with a part two. You mentioned something that I wrote down, and it's a variation. It's kind of a variant of something I talk about. You say something that's not made in a plant is made of plants. I talk about by produce and not products. I told you we had a lot in common. So,
that's right. That synergy.
Look, man, I can't thank you enough. I know that the people who are watching or listening to this are benefiting greatly from your insight. So thank you for being here. Thank you for all you do for our community specifically, but for the greater community at large. I hope that you will consider coming back one day. And I'll even say something nice about the Cowboys if you do that. So thank you again. Thank you all for tuning in. Remember, don't let culture, cost, or convenience ruin your health. Until next time, everybody take care. Happy New Year. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Healthy and Black. I'm your host, Dr. Jarek Conrad. If you have feedback on today's episode, please email info@jarekconrad.com. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to visit jarekconrad.com to subscribe to my blog. Thanks for listening. Please tell your friends about the podcast. Until next time, don't let culture, cost, or convenience ruin your health.